Well, here we are on a Sunday night uh, after a somewhat chilly weekend. At least we got to warm up a little bit today, even here in North Georgia, as well as up through the Mid Atlantic and Northeast. But rain is on the way, and actually, the rainfall should be fairly substantial, continuing to cut into that drought deficit that we have. And we're going to be taking a look at everything that's going to be going on in the busy week ahead that's going to end up cold at the end. And we'll take a look at the long range. And that is what we have in store tonight on the Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast, which you can lend your support and do your holiday shopping at the Amazon referral link that's on the pinned to the top of the chat board. It's also on the description to this podcast. It's pretty simple. Just use that as your starting point. Stop, get whatever it is you're going to get, and Amazon will throw us back a little bit of coin for sending you there, and it doesn't come out of your pocket. So it's an uh, easy, nice way to support the Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast. So uh, weekend's coming to an end, and we are looking at some wet weather coming up for this week.
Yes, especially on Wednesday with an approaching weather front, a cold front. Might even see some lightning and thunder, I think. That crossed my mind when I took a look at the maps earlier today, Joe. And before we get that Wednesday wetness, we're going to have some wetness coming our way briefly tomorrow, especially during the second half of the day with a quickie quarter to a half an inch. And then we'll have more of a 1 to 2 inch drop, maybe even more than that for again, for the Wednesday weather event.
Yeah, WPC seems to be pretty bullish on the rainfall amounts. And then we got a shot of another shot of cold air that comes in for Thursday and lasts into early Saturday before it probably starts to warm up again. We're seem to be in this sort of transitory pattern here where uh, 2 days, 3 days cold, a day, 2 days above normal, and on it goes. Nothing seems to want to be sustained.
Yeah, it looks like we're going to be in flux, if you will. Will be, as you just pointed out, periods of mild weather. Could get close to 60 here with the rain on Wednesday, and then a sharp drop in the temperature for Thursday and Friday, along with, once again, a gusty wind. This has got to be one of the windiest autumns or falls that I could remember in quite some time.
And that probably also means that the lake effect snow machine is going to get turned on again, I think.
Yeah, it looks like that's going to be the story again too. So if you're a snow lover, you might as well head up to the western end of New York State or northwestern PA or upstate New York, and you'll find yourself once again seeing quite a bit of the white stuff. Of course, the white stuff that has fallen or fell during the Thanksgiving period, that's going to be diminished considerably by the wet weather coming our way for this week, and then nature will move forward and try to replenish what she got rid of with all the wet weather later in the week with the return of the lake effect.
Yeah, we'll see how it plays. It doesn't look like they're going to get a whole lot of rain to the west. It seems to be a coastal plain event. That's actually maybe good news because with all the snow that fell and it's on the ground and hasn't really gone away, given the cold, that they would have been setting up for a major league flash flood event if this front was further west and the heavy rain was going to be centered further west. But on the other hand, it's a big plus for areas in the East Coast, particularly the eastern portions of the Mid Atlantic up through into New England, where we had that 10 plus inch rainfall deficit and moderate to in some places extreme drought. So this will this is another event that's going to put a dent in that, and we seem to be playing catch up with a more active pattern. I think that's a big positive here going forward.
Yeah, I think on Wednesday, it does not go as far as that yet, but on Tuesday, there's kind of a finger of marginal risk of flooding, flash flooding, extending from the Gulf Coast all the way up into central Virginia with a slight risk. Right about where you are too, Joe, over in western sections of North Carolina, South Carolina, and across northern and central sections of Georgia and southeastern Alabama. And you would figure that for Wednesday, that would be day four, if there was a day four available. But I would suspect that we will be in a marginal risk even up here in our neck of the woods here in the Northeast with all of that wet weather expected. And then behind that, as you pointed out, colder weather sweeping in quite rapidly. I mean, what a big drop. We'll be again near 60 perhaps on Wednesday, and then we'll only be in the 30s, which will feel more like the 20s with a gusty, blustery wind on Thursday.
So Joe Z, and I'm going to answer this question. It says, and he says it's $1 million question. I'm going to give you a $1.99 answer. Why does it never snow in New York City anymore? So let's just take that question and point out that if you look at records going back to 1869, the majority of winters, you get your average snowfall for that period is about 30 inches, for a given year. But if you look at the individual years, there are more below average years than there are above average, and it's not unusual. There are many streaks in there of several years in a row. In some cases, 8 or 9 years in a row where the snowfall was below average. And the other thing I would point out is that it is it is rare for to, to that it's rare might be a little strong, but it's unusual to see significant snows before in the first half of December. It's happened in the past, but it's usually more in the second half, and particularly at the end of the month, and you start to go into January that's when your chances for snow are much higher. Anything you get before that, that includes Christmas, is an odd here year, an odd here there. And as I said, there have been occasional big storms that have occurred in the first few weeks of December, but most years it just doesn't happen. So it's still a little bit early to
1928 on this day in 1928, and it was a Saturday, not a Sunday, but on this day in 1928 there was the first measurable snowfall of the winter at Central Park with 2 inches accumulation. You say, "Oh darn it, why can't it be like that anymore?" Well, after that 2 inches on this day in 1928, the next measurable snowfall wouldn't come until January 13th, and the next snowfall of an inch or more wouldn't be until February 20th. So you had snow, significant snowfalls, which occurred almost on a basis of once every 5 or 6 weeks. So would you like to see it go back, to the 1920s or 1928? Again, winters are strange. There are some winters where it'll snow at the drop of a pin, and you'll get a ton of it before the end of the winter season. And then there are winters like 1928, where you get a couple of inches here, then you have to wait about 5 or 6 weeks before get another couple of inches, and then another 5 or 6 weeks before you get still
another right.
snow. So it varies, it ebbs and it flows. What kind of a winter are we going to see in terms of snowfall this year? We're just going to have to wait and see.
Right, and every ten years or so, you get one of these winters that uh, you know where it's 3 months of sustained cold and it snows a lot, little events and big events, again, those are rare. It's just that everybody's pretty much, if you experience the weather from 2000 to 2020, you started to believe that, big snow winters happen every year, and that just isn't the case. We had a nice 20-year upcycle. Maybe it's done, but we'll see. Uh, Watches and warnings tonight. I'm going to bring the map up. Let's say hi to everybody on the chat board. Welcome to tonight's Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast. And a big hi to those of you who are new or watching in the background. We're glad you're here. If you like the show, hit the like button. Subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss us. We're here Sunday through Thursday at 7:35 p.m. and the occasional Friday and Saturday should a storm warrant it. And don't forget to turn your notifications on so this way you don't miss us. Not a whole lot happening around the country. It's been fairly quiet. I mean, outside of the lake effect snows that we've seen since right after Thanksgiving, The rest of the country's been just sort of, not much really going on to speak of. We have a few winter storm warnings up in the northern counties of Minnesota bordering Canada, with some advisories underneath them. And we also have a couple of blizzard warnings, looks like in one, two, three, four, five counties in eastern Montana, with a bunch of counties with winter weather advisories. And other than that, I mean, you look at the rest of the nation, really not a whole lot happening at the moment. And the satellite loop tonight. Now, you've got three players here, and if you look at the loop now, oh, did you get any snow last night?
The radar suggested that we were getting snow at about 11 o'clock. However, stepping outside, didn't see anything. So I
Right,
figured that it was probably more Virga than anything else. I know it was snowing at 11 o'clock in Albany. It really was not snowing at all where we were here in Putnam Valley. So, yeah, if there was anything, it was probably more like dandruff flakes. And I suspect also, Joe, with the temperature hovering near or just above freezing, it could have also have been sleet as opposed to snow.
right. All right. So just looking at the loop, that player, by the way, let me just bring the palette down so you can see it. So that system is now moved east into New Brunswick and moving along. You've got this subtropical jet coming out of the Pacific across Mexico into Texas and the Gulf states, and that is spreading moisture up into the Tennessee and Ohio Valley, and there's rain with that. That's going to be the rain that comes in during Monday, and that looks like it could be third to maybe a half an inch. And of course, you've got this other system in the northern part of the jet stream that's moving along, that's sort of pulling all of this up northward. And then we are going to have a second system that's going to come in behind it. That's going to make for a nice deep trough in the eastern part of the United States on Wednesday. And as Joe pointed out, that looks to be a big rainmaker. And yeah, maybe there. I also mentioned the possibility that there could be a thunderstorm in the mix, and we could get perhaps 2 inch plus rainfalls out of that, which, as I said earlier, is beneficial. Not much going on in the west other than some moisture in the Pacific Northwest. Um, Clouds increasing northeastward up into West Virginia and Western Virginia, Western North Carolina, ahead of all that moisture that is coming up. And as we check out the radar, rain is not exactly on my doorstep yet, but it's getting close. There's some precip aloft that has just about reached Atlanta. And then if you get into the greens, it's particularly the darker greens and the yellows, you're looking at areas of moderate to occasionally heavy rain that go back through Alabama, Mississippi, into eastern Louisiana, and then up the Mississippi River Valley into southern Illinois and Indiana. The northeast radars are quiet, and we've got a little bit of precipitation in northern Wisconsin, and also in northeastern Minnesota. Some of that is snow, and that's moving eastward with that disturbance that's moving along the Canadian border. Storm Prediction Center going on into, I'm going to jump to uh, Tuesday into Wednesday. This is where we have a small area of marginal risk for southern Alabama, the Florida Panhandle, and southwest Georgia. And through Wednesday morning, at least, they've got the general thunderstorm line reaching as far north as Cape May, New Jersey, and cuts across the Delmarva Peninsula into northern Virginia. So I think tomorrow, when we see what SPC is going to do, you'll probably see that general thunderstorm line probably moving up north of New York City, I would think, and maybe even into central New England.
I would think so. I would think that what we're going to be looking at on Wednesday will contain embedded convection. And I'll go so far as to say, Joe, it's a little early in the game, but I'll go so far as to say that there might even be a touch of marginal risk, if not in the immediate New York area, at least in portions of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and down into the Mid-Atlantic area. So it's going to be that kind of a day on Wednesday, a wet and rather stormy kind of a day if you want to look at it from all different corners.
WPC, and we know how WPC loves to lurk in the background here on the Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast. Substantial precip here. The purple anything purple and darker, get into the darker, the brighter purples and the red, I guess if you want to describe it that way, particularly in the red area that you see in New England, back to Long Island and parts of the Hudson Valley, that's 2.5 inches plus. Now, some of that's going to include tomorrow. So if you subtract out a half an inch, you're still talking about a good solid 2 inch rainfall for later Tuesday night and Wednesday. In Western New York, now this is where it gets a little tricky because they've got inch and a half plus liquids being indicated for southwestern New York back into northeast Ohio. I got to think since this map goes till next Sunday night, some of that is going to be most of that is probably lake effect from what's going to be behind this Arctic front and wave that's developing on it, and not so much the rain ahead of it. The rain ahead of it, I would probably put down, and they've got a 3/4 of an inch to an inch. So it might be something like that with the two weather systems combined. West of the Mississippi, it's quiet, picks up a little bit in the Pacific Northwest, but that's an area where oftentimes you see them forecasting 10 inches or more of rain over a 7-day period, and then you see that forecast for days and days and days. Well, it's not anywhere near that level, but there is a little bit of moisture there up in the Pacific Northwest. So I'm going to start with the and shambles, Joe. All right, for
Okay.
the long range folks, because I've been watching these, rather closely over the weekend just to see how they're doing and where they're going in terms of the long range. And it's kind of interesting to me that even though obviously you've got this trough along and off the East Coast that's pulled out it this weekend, and we're getting a little bit of ridging ahead of short waves that are coming at us for this week. And let me just point those out. You got one there from Missouri on south. Now, that's our system for Monday. And then you've got this stronger trough from Winnipeg southwest into Idaho, and that's going to be the upper air system for Wednesday. You'll notice that the ridge is popping up off the west coast up into Alaska, and there is some colder flow here that is coming down out of Canada behind that trough that's from Lake Winnipeg and swinging east. And as we move along through this week, the first short wave just kind of gets absorbed in the flow and lifts up. You can sort of see it. There's a little kink that goes by, but the second trough really digs down uh, right down the middle of the country, and you've got this upper low that forms near Lake Winnipeg, and then it just swings this negatively tilted arm up into the east for Tuesday night, Wednesday into Wednesday night. So that's going to be the big rainmaker. And then we get into, as we get the upper air set up for Thursday and Friday, the flow is coming straight out of northern Canada into the southeastern part of the United States. So it is cold, no question. There'll be a decent shot of cold air behind it. Now, longer term, that's going to lift out. And we go into this sort of warmer flow next weekend and into the start of next week. But then as we move through next week, interestingly enough, the heights start to drop, and you'll notice the brownish area, which would be considered above normal heights at that level, above normal pressures, and warmer air, starts to fade, and it starts to go to that more whitish color, which is closer to normal. And you see by the time we get to the 18th or the 19th that you've got a ridge in the west, you have a trough in the east, and you also have a low in the Aleutians with troughing down off the west coast. So these are all, if you're looking, if you're looking for, okay, well, where is it? What is it? What's going to happen here? Are we going to go back to a colder pattern? It certainly suggests that we are. And as we head toward, Christmas, we do have generally, it's not a bitter cold look by any means, but it is at least a seasonal cold look, if not maybe a little bit below as we head toward Christmas. It's like all the players seem to want to get into the right spot. I think it's going to wind up being a question of amplitude as we get into this, the last 10 days of the month. But as a winter weather lover, I'm somewhat encouraged seeing the um, the ensembles doing this. And we could even take a look at the European ensemble, which which should be mostly done. And yeah, it is. And I mean, we look at the European ensemble, it's kind of on the same page here, same idea. Here's the Wednesday, very, excuse me, very deep trough that lifts up and out. We get into that warmish pattern into next week, and then gradually that sort of fades away, and you get that, troughing off the west coast, from the Aleutians on south along. Well, you want to see the trough axis around 160, which it is. You got a ridge around 120, goes up into Western Canada, and general troughing in the eastern part of the United States. So on the whole, um, as I said, I think if you're a winter weather lover for the latter part of the month, let's say the last 10 days maybe, I would, I would say this is an encouraging sign to see in the upper air.
Hope springs eternal, and that's more or less what Mr. Tolerus was talking about on our last show on Thursday. Is the expectation as we get toward the end of December and into the beginning of January that we would begin to see more of a cold weather pattern envelop the eastern part of the country. So we'll see if that indeed does transpire.
And if it just makes everybody feel better, the CFS model, which as you all know what I like to call it, the can't forecast doo doo, the word for doo doo that starts with S, is uh, kind of doing the same thing, taking a little bit longer maybe to get to that point, but it definitely shows us getting cold for the by the time we get into January. I mean, as a rather cold look. So those three models at least seem to be on the same page. That doesn't mean that we can't come in the next over the next week and start to see things getting pushed back. I hope that doesn't happen where you sit around and say, okay, it gets gets pushed back a week, then it gets pushed back another week, and then before you know it, it's March, and there's no place left to push back. So uh, you know, keep your
And
fingers
in,
keep your fingers crossed.
and in case, just for those who are saying, oh, it's never going to snow again here in New York, oh, this is terrible, or they, let's point this out. And of course, Joe and I lived through this, so we can attest to it. But New York City in the 1970s and 1980s saw very few heavy snowfalls. In fact, only 6 times during the decade of the 1970s and 5 times in the decade of the 80s were there winters where there were snowfalls or snowstorms of 6 inches or more that took place. But once we got into the 1990s, all of a sudden things flipped. In the 1990s, the decade of the 1990s, there were 11 storms of a half a foot or more. And
Right.
that
But I would just point out the 90s were no glorious decade either, because if there were only two winters in that year that actually had above normal snowfall. So most of those snowfalls
96.
occurred
Yeah,
95, 96, and 93, 94. And
right.
then you add 92, 93 had the superstorm in March. But other than that, um, the rest of them, 7 of the 10 years, the 90s actually, when you do it by decade, I did this, I did all the math. The 90s was the least snowiest decade on record, believe it or not. Even with
Really?
96, which was the snowiest winter ever, it's in Central Park with 76 inches. The 90s were the three least snowiest decades, okay? The 1990s, the 1980s, and the 1970s. All three. And
Now,
when and that those were when those 30 years were in the calculation of the 30-year normals, that was when New York City's average snowfall was down had dropped down from 30 to 20.
yeah, that's right. But now, and let me ask if you'll agree with this, the number has risen to 13 6 inch or more snowfalls in the decade of the 2000s, 18 in the 2010s, which also saw 3 storms in the decade of the 2010s that dumped 20 inches or more, including an unheard of two in one single year, February 25th, 27th, and December 26th, 27th, 2010. So, you look back over the 70s and the 80s and 90s and you say, that there was hardly any year or any winter in particular that you could say, "Oh, it was great," you know. And meantime, in ever since we turned into the new century, we've been seeing in New York City quite a bit of snow.
Yeah,
And yet this year and for the last couple of years, yeah, all right, we've had a paucity, if you will, a very low amount of snowfalls, but you can't complain compared to what, you know, especially what Joe and I remember back in the 70s and 80s. I mean, like if it snowed more than 6 inches in the 1970s, you know, there were snow lovers who were jumping out into the street and doing a dance, you know, saying, Hallelujah, it finally has happened or whatever. It was a rarity. But recently, recent decades, last 20 years or so, it's been anything but that. And December, especially. Now, I don't know about how this December is going to end up, but I mean, December, Joe, used to be a month where you get like, you know, a slack month. It would be like 2, 3, 4 inches at most.
right.
But you know, in some years, the last 20 years, we've seen what? We've seen some Decembers that have dropped like 10, 15, 20 inches of snow in New
Right.
York City.
Well,
Crazy.
The December normals went, you know, over the from the 1990s to now. I mean, the December normals prior to 1970 was about 6 inches. By the time we got to the end of 2000, it was down to 2 inches, and now it's back up to six. So the long-term average is about six for the month. But
Right.
there are long stretches, and we get these things. There's a cyclicality to this sort of stuff, where you get a lot, and then you go through a whole bunch of years where you don't get much. So we'll see. Yeah, I tell you another thing I'll say is that if let's just say for laughs that the Knicks, you know, we've got this winter 24, 25, and you know, running through the winter of 29, 30. If all those winters wind up being above normal, which I don't know that they will be, if all those winters wind up being above normal, the average snowfall is from 30 is going to go up. It may go up to like 32 or 33 because of the fact that the 90s are going to come out. And remember, the 90s are in the current calculation. They're the least snowiest decade on record. That comes out of the calculation, leaving you with, you know, 20 years where the snow was just out of control. We'll see, you know, we'll see how it goes. Because of course, you know, our show contract has been extended through the winter of 29, 30. Joe, I don't know if I told you that. So
No, I
we'll
didn't know
be
that.
we'll still be here on Sunday through Thursdays at 7:35 p.m. Eastern time, albeit we'll be slightly older and a bit more cranky by the time we get there. So here comes the system for Monday. You notice the snow from right along the northern tier there with a low in northwest Minnesota pulls up all this Gulf moisture. So rain comes in Monday morning. It's probably goes out Monday evening from west to east across the south. We see that rain spreading up into Tennessee, into Kentucky and West Virginia. The southern part of that, you know, weakens out a bit, and then we have the second wave with a developing Arctic boundary that develops on Tuesday that starts to bring rain northeastward, and then we get into some rain into the northeast. Looks like it rains all the way up all the way up into north of the New York State Canadian border with some pockets of ice, and then of course the front slows down, waiting for another wave that develops, and you see it there in northeast Georgia Wednesday morning, and that flies up the Appalachians. And by Wednesday, you know, afternoon and evening, if you believe the GFS, you know, you're talking about significant precip here from Massachusetts and the Catskills, and it is all rain, clearly, running down the coastline. Now, there probably will be a changeover to snow on the backside because of the negative tilt of the trough, and you know the western half of Pennsylvania, western New York, very not much rain. You know that first shot of rain gets into western New York, but then not much rain really. So that at least you know prevents them from getting into a serious flash flooding situation. And then the lake effect machine goes on as the wave goes by, and of course the gradient gets pretty tight again for Thursday into Friday. Decent shot of cold air that comes in. But it's how it goes for the weekend. I'm using the 12Z run. There's some kind of low that the model's picking up east of the Bahamas. You can sort of see it there on the lower right. It's not a tropical system, but there must be some kind of upper low that's down there. that the model seems to be picking up on. So next week we've got a front that around Tuesday or Wednesday comes through with some sort of weird low that forms in Virginia that kind of rotates northward. Not sure how this is going to, how real this is. And then as we move down, you start to get into past December 19th or 20th, all of a sudden there's like this big cold high comes down out of Canada. And I like this look. What I mean, I personally liked it. I'm not saying I liked it from the standpoint that I think it's going to happen, because it's already different on the next on the 18Z run. But it's got a setup for this massive overrunning. One of these 1,000-mile warm fronts again, Joe. A low in southwest of El Paso, and a warm front that goes from there all the way to the southeast coast. The 1,000-mile warm front is again on the map. We haven't seen that in a long time.
Yeah, yeah, indeed. And well, you talk about extensive high pressure. That's pretty extensive.
Well, you know what? This goes. I'll just go back to what Dave Tolliver said about the way the pattern looks. It would favor overrunning events. So that's the first thing I thought of when I saw this was that, this is kind of what Dave was referring to in terms of how the upper air is being structured. That it would be favorable for overrunning events. We haven't seen overrunning events set up in quite a long. Certainly not in the last uh, several years. It's hard for me to remember the last time we had a winter where we had a lot of overrunning events. But I mean, I know the 2002, 2003, it was one overrunning event after another. You never got into any really intense storms. It was just basically, overrunning stalled fronts with flat waves moving along that generated a lot of moisture into the cold air and dumped quite a bit of snow in its wake. So, this kind of matches up with what Dave was saying last week. We'll see how things evolve. But as I said earlier, I'm kind of encouraged with what the Ann Shambles have been putting up over the last couple of days.
Yeah, and let's also point out that with warm frontal or overrunning snowfalls, you can get quite a. I mean, everybody, of course, would like to see some kind of a coastal storm system or an explosively deepening storm off the mid-Atlantic or northeast coastline. But let me tell you, with a warm front approaching, if it's a pretty significant warm front, you can get on overrunning a pretty a thump, a heavy dose of snow in a relatively short interval of time. Not saying that that's going to happen in the days to come here, but don't put down warm frontal passages because they could also bring in quite a bit, at least on the front, for front-loaded systems before they come swooping on by and puts us in a warmer airflow, which may change the snow over to rain. But out front, you could get quite a bit of snow on the front side of these things.
Who has Briller Jeopardy tonight?
I do believe I do. I think I do, and I'm going to check. And I'm in fact I know that I have it. I saw it today on my phone. Now if I could just only call it up here. Hang on for just one momento. Oh darn it! All right, hang on. I got to go to my other Facebook page on my professional page. Sometimes when I go and try to get something, it won't work. I have to go to my personal page to pick up my messenger messages. And here it is. And he writes, and this goes back actually last Wednesday, uh, on this Briller Jeopardy, average snowfall in December for the following cities. And here's a giveaway or a throwaway since we just recently talked about this. And when I say recently, it was just like a few minutes ago. Average December snowfall at Central Park, Joe.
Oh, it's just around 6. Are we rounding off?
Yes, we're rounding off.
Okay, so I'm trying to remember what the exact number was. I don't know if it was like 5.3 or 5.4. Um, it's either 5 or 6. I'll say 6.
You should have said five.
I know. Cardillo, Rosenberg, Dreams, Frank R, DeCara, Maggie P, Mike Waterhouse. A lot of people got five, so you can ring the bell for them.
Yes, I will. Sunday bell ring. There you go. How about the Steel City, Pittsburgh?
Pittsburgh. I'll say obviously I'm going to go a little higher. I'll say nine.
All right. Well, it's not a bad guess, but it's a little on the high side.
Right. Croce, Shark, Melander, all say eight. Maggie P, Latex Dreams, seven. Owen D, a seven. Zakara, seven. Cassie, a
Now
seven. Rupa,
that's
seven. Huber,
that's the
seven.
magic. That's the magic number.
Right.
Seven. Seven in Pittsburgh. Average snowfall in the month of December. How about Richmond, Virginia?
Virginia for December?
Yes.
Hmm. One.
Not a bad guess, but a
Anthony
little.
says two. Huber says two. Frank R, two. Mike
Alan Rupa,
Waterhouse,
two.
Bonsai, three.
James
Mike.
Fox at two. All of you who went with two, you got it. You got it.
Okay. Next.
Next is Richmond. Excuse me, is Philadelphia.
Um, all right, New York is five, so Philadelphia is going to be lower. I'll say it's either three or four. Uh, if you round it off, I'll say three. If you round it off,
If you round it off, you rounded right, Joe.
I
Three.
did. So did
Yes.
Scalera. Three. Mr.
So I'm going to
Frank,
ring the bell for that.
thank you.
There you are. How about, and this is Tom Contino's favorite, or is it Reuben Fairchild's favorite? Rochester. And I'm not saying for Minnesota. This is Rochester, New
New
York.
York. I'll say 19.
That's a pretty good guess, but it's not high enough.
I didn't think so. Um, all right. Anthony says 21.
That's even better, but it's
Still not
even
enough.
closer. Still not
All
enough.
right. Well, then Waterhouse Bonsai says 22, and Michael McGuire says 23. Scalera said 23. Frank Scalera at 23. Still not high enough?
All of you who went with double deuce like Rich Rotmansky and Joe Z and Chuck Cardillo and Frank R and Dennis Cassia, uh, that is it. Rochester, 22 inches
Okay.
average in December. And now here is the bonus city as we finish out the night, and that is Portland, Maine.
Hmm. Why would
Rotmansky
you, why,
to ring the bell, so I rang it.
oh, you
So
rang the bell for Rich. Okay. Um, hmm. Uh, Di- Diamante Robertson, thank you for hitting Robeson. Uh, thank you for hitting Super Chat tonight. I really, really appreciate it. And glad to see you here on the chat board. Okay, Portland, Maine. They're a coastal city, but they're north of Boston. I'll say 11.
that's not a bad guess, but it's not quite enough.
Right. Not a bad guess, he says.
Now, Richard Bond
Uh,
says 14, which puts him in snake country, and Mike Waterhouse Bonsai is in snake country with 16. So what does that say? What
that
does
says
that?
Frank Scalera gets it at 15.
That's right. Maine,
And
Portland.
Lou Arizio also said 15.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's good.
And who hit the
Everybody
chip?
did everybody did pretty well with that.
Diamante? Diamante?
Roberson, yes. He hit
Roberson.
he hit super chat.
Did you say dynamite initially?
No, I said
Oh, I thought. Okay.
no, Diamante.
Diamante.
Right.
Diamante.
Ring the bell
Welcome.
for him. He hit super chat. Ring the bell.
All right. Congratulations.
And he's new on the chat board, so I think he's new
Yes.
on the chat board.
Yes.
If he
Okay.
hasn't, I haven't seen him for a while.
Okay.
All right. So your weekend was good, Joe. You got a beautiful red shirt on.
Thank you. I went to a Christmas party
You
today.
went to a Raccoon Lodge Christmas party wearing your raccoon hat?
I didn't, I should have wore the raccoon hat. It would have made things more festive. No, it was the local German club that had their annual party, and it was amusing.
Uh, trying to remember exactly what I did this week. I had a week last week. I really didn't talk about this too much, but I had a week last week, and if everything could have gone wrong, it went wrong. Uh, and at least now it seems to be ending well. So among other things, now um, I had I had a family over on Thursday for Thanksgiving.
Right,
The weekend Thanksgiving weekend, I had a friend visiting. Then and he left, and then I had two friends from Long Island that came last week, and we went fishing on Wednesday.
right.
Okay,
In 18-degree
and
weather.
then right, and my friend Phil, who I love dearly, and I love my friend Howie too. But Phil, he went home on Saturday, so finally today, as like my first day where I was able to sit in my house and just relax. So that really felt good. But um, Tuesday, Tuesday when I went to the airport to pick up Phil, I had plenty of time, so you know, I made a Costco run because Costco was on the way to the airport. Now, to understand that the Atlanta airport is about 2 hours and 20-minute drive for me. It's 100 and some odd miles. So,
And
um,
you actually would, and you actually, this shows the kind of person Joe is, folks. He was willing to pick up his friend from the airport that was over 2 hours away. What a great guy.
yes. So thank you. I know I am a great guy. So I decided that I had some time. I thought, okay, well, because I don't have a Costco anywhere near me. The nearest Costco is an hour and a half. So, but there's a Costco on the way to the airport, so they'll stop at that Costco, which I did. And then as I was leaving, I was making a right turn. Somebody else was making a left turn, and we decided to come together.
Oh,
So I had, we we
no
clipped.
good turn, no good turn goes unpunished, right?
Right. So, we did a little bit of a clip. I have some minor fender damage on my vehicle. Otherwise, everything was fine. And I have to go Wednesday. I have to drive almost 2 hours to the Geico um uh the Geico car repair, body shop to get it to drop the truck off to get it repaired. But thankfully it was minor. So Wednesday, of course, we go fishing and it's 17 degrees and we're on the boat and the boat captain says, "Okay, hold on because we got to go. You have to go 2.5 miles." We were going out at 40 miles an hour, and it was, I swear, I felt like I was in Barrow, Alaska. It was brutal, absolutely brutal to have that wind uh, from the motion of the boat. You're hitting the wind, and it's 17-degree air, so it hurt like hell. Thank God I caught the fish I caught, which I showed last week. So there was that. Thursday, I didn't mention this. I didn't mention this to you off camera. Thursday, we have you can have the garbage truck come and pick up your garbage at your house, but it's like 90% cheaper if you just take the garbage over to the town transfer station, and it's on my way to the dog park. So we went to we were on our way to the transfer station, and we were about maybe a half a mile from there, and it's basically woods. The road goes through woods and some farmland. I hear this huge crash on my driver's side window and the side view mirror. A hawk crashed into the side of my car.
What crashed into your
A
car?
hawk. Apparently, a hawk that didn't have needed glasses because they're supposed to have, they do have exceptional eyesight. This one had issues. So apparently he didn't see me. and he just came and smashed it. Joe, it was like it sounded like a boulder hit the window somehow. So we just, basically, it happened, and we're just like, what the hell was that? So we just went to the garbage dump, dumped our garbage, came back on the same road. We stopped where this all happened. There was no hawk anywhere. So apparently, maybe it was dazed or something, and then it just, took off, which was fine. So I was happy about that. However, it was an omen because um, later that day, I discovered that someone had hacked into my PayPal account and took $1,100.
Ouch.
So yes, that was not. So anyway, it's turned. Well, my luck seems to have turned because um, they were able to get the money from whoever stole it, and it's all the money's back into my account now, and everything is secured. And I got a few little things I got to straighten out, but that was taken care of. So that was a primary. That was on my mind for the last 3 days. So finally today, I got the email from PayPal at around 9:30 this morning. I was like, "Thank you, Lord, it's over." I got, that was a big headache and a scary thing. So anyway, like I said, last week was a really weird week. Mercury must have been in retrograde to Libra, which is always, you ever try to bring something back at the store, they usually tell you that they don't allow it, they're not allowed to, they don't take returns during, when Mercury's in retrograde. So, that's what last week was like. So this week, apparently now Mercury is no longer in retrograde to Libra.
Whatever you say, Joe.
I know, that was a long, that was a long story, but I figured, yeah, I know, Frank, I need to relax with a bottle of wine, let alone a glass. And Alan, I have no idea. If you ever heard this story about drones over New Jersey, that there's like they're flying drones all over the place, and nobody seems to
Yeah,
know.
they've been talking about that for a long time. Also,
Excuse me.
Staten Island. They're trying to figure out. I mean, what's the mystery? If you see one in the sky, just keep it in track with a telescope or a pair of binoculars until you follow it in your car.
Do you have a drone? Do you have one of those drone things?
no, I don't. I did say once a long time ago, crossed my mind, if I was able to get a hold of one of those giant, like 4 or 6 foot balloons, I would tie a long string to it, and I would attach to that string, 3 or 4 of those. Remember those tubes where you break them and they suddenly glow a bright greenish
Yeah,
color? Then you let the balloon go, and now in the sky there's like 4 lights, which the wind is blowing back and forth, it's shaking back in, and what is that? Is that a UFO? Cause a little confusion or whatever like that. But the drone is of course something different. Some of these they saying about are as large as trucks. They're claiming big airborne vehicles just flying over different parts of New York City and New Jersey. Who knows? Who
all
knows
right.
what?
Well, maybe Amazon is testing delivery services via drones. And don't
Maybe.
laugh because there are parts of the country. I know there's parts in places in Arizona where they drones will bring your stuff. You order it, and like a couple hours later, a drone shows up and drops it off at your house.
Right.
Oh, they wouldn't do well here because there's too many trees and too many people that would see them and probably shoot them down. But that's another story for another day.
That's our society today. Shoot it
Yes.
down. Shoot it down.
All right. I think that's enough for a Sunday night. Thanks everybody for being here, and we'll be back tomorrow night at 7:35 p.m. Hopefully, the for you winter weather lovers, the ensembles remain encouraging. So we'll see you tomorrow. Nighty
We'll be.
night.
Have fun. Good night, folks.